Well, Don, it began for me in 1963 when I was assigned to the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers in Europe. I arrived in the summer of '63 and I was assigned to the Operations Division. I was further assigned to what we call SHOC, the War Room, the Supreme Headquarters Operations Center. And at that time I was given a cosmic top secret clearance, which was and still is the highest level of security access that NATO has. When I was assigned to the War Room, I learned that a study had been initiated in 1961, and everybody was talking about it. They were gossiping about it. And the subject was UFOs, and that intrigued me a bit. When that study was concluded in 1964 and it was published, and I was still working in the War Room at that time, I had access to this document. I had a chance to read it. And having been exposed to it, I must tell you honestly that my life has never ever quite been the same. Because I read first-hand reports, verifiable NATO military material that indicated that the UFOs were not only real, that they represented something far beyond anything I had ever imagined before. When the study was concluded in '64, they concluded that there were 4 different groups apparently coming and visiting us. Out of those 4 different groups, one group looked exactly like we do, so much so that they could sit beside you in a restaurant or in an airplane or in a theater, and you'd never know. And that particular point bothered the military guys a lot. The point being that some of these people from somewhere could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE headquarters, or they could be walking up and down the corridors of the Pentagon. One day at lunch, a lieutenant colonel made the remark, he says, "Jesus, do you realize they could even be in the White House?" And there was a little forced laughter at that point, I remember, because a lot of us over the years have had some misgivings about the occupants of the White House. But the point I'm making is that the idea that aliens could be here in our midst bothered the military, because if you're not paranoid when you go into the service, you're certainly trained very quickly to be so. It's the nature of the military mind, I think, to be paranoid. But that was only part of the story. The SHAPE conclusions in '64 were that there were 4 groups that we knew of. They were apparently interplanetary. Some very likely were interstellar. They even concluded that some of them could be intergalactic. When I retired in 1976, many of our military people knew at that point that we were not simply dealing with visitations from people from other planets or star systems. They had concluded by '76 that some of these visitors very well might be multidimensional in their source. The evidence that we had collected and the evidence that they had repeatedly demonstrated to us, and that's no accident. It became very clear after a time that there was a program or a process of some kind underway, that they had demonstrated over and over and over again that they apparently were able to manipulate matter and time. Now this really shook up our scientists. There are a lot of new young scientists in particle physics today who talk about multiple dimensions. There's a brilliant young professor in New York by the name of Michio Kaku, who has written a brilliant book called Hyperspace, where they talk about 10 separate dimensions. I'm not enough of a physicist to try to explain to you what a dimension is, but the idea that there could be intelligences from somewhere else, from other dimensions, coming and going into our reality. It's been quite a shakeup in traditional science. I guess I speak out openly and bluntly about this because I feel so strongly about it. I violate my security oath every time I speak about it. I do it intentionally and I do it on purpose, because I feel so strongly that the American people not only have a right to know the truth, but they have a need to know the truth. The truth, Don, apparently is simply this, that we're not alone, we've never been alone. We are apparently part of an infinite universe filled with intelligent life. I find that exciting. It doesn't frighten me. The shape study concluded in '64 that if they, whoever they were malevolent or hostile, that they could have taken this planet and cleaned it up and eliminated us, turned us into dog food or whatever, a long, long time ago. That the historical evidence indicates that they've been with us a long time, and I've concluded that we had what I like to call an intimate interrelationship with at least one of those groups, the group that looks exactly like we do. And that point is, I don't like the word alien. I don't think the term alien is appropriate at all here. I like to refer to them as family. We're related to them. I think they had a hand in our being here. And I think the time has come where we're about to meet our extended family.
Sightings have increased in frequency, and this is due to an actual increase of these unidentifieds flying with impunity within our restricted airspace. But also our technologies are getting better in some of our fighter planes, where we're able to track and verify through multi-platforms that these things are real. UFOs are real. They outpace, outmaneuver, and outperform anything we have. So this is a real issue.
Many people who've seen UFOs report having been burned or having brain difficulties afterward. Kind of an amazing report. That's straight ahead. People who ask questions about UFOs are written off as deranged conspiracy mongers. Oh, shut up about UFOs. Then we learned about something called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. It was an operation at the Pentagon, cloaked from public scrutiny, that studied UFO sightings for a very long time, and it was completely real, because those sightings are real. The Defense Intelligence Agency has just released that program's 2010 report on UFOs, and among other things, the document tells us that the government can prove that UFO sightings have caused radiation burns, paralysis, and brain damage. The report also says that some people who saw UFOs experienced, quote, perceived time suspension. They also saw ghosts and other spirits. In all, that report lists 42 cases of adverse effects from medical files and another 300 adverse effects from unpublished cases, whatever that means. Lou Elizondo knows what it means because he used to run the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. We're happy to have him on tonight. Lou, thanks so much for coming on. So, I mean, this was a feature of people's firsthand accounts going back 50 years to the 60s. You know, I saw this thing and I had these physical effects. I guess that turns out to be real. Tell us about these effects.
Yeah, Tucker, actually, it's even more than that. This is not, you know, the notion of where, let's say, grandma saw some lights in the backyard. These are military eyewitnesses. In some cases, they're fighter pilots or they're security personnel that have come up close and personal with a UAP, or I guess in the vernacular, UFO. And in some cases, they have sustained some sort of medical trauma, something that can be looked at and quantified and qualified and measured as some sort of biological effect, that they didn't suffer these consequences until they came up close and personal to a UFO. And by the way, let me just say, this isn't pseudoscience. You know, for you're absolutely right in your intro. For many years, we've been told, oh, you know, this is silly and whatnot, and this topic is really not to be taken seriously. Look, I was part of the program. I ran the program for a better part of 8 years on this topic. It is absolutely real. And now, finally, because of the pressure put by Congress and people like you in the media, finally our government is beginning to become more transparent about this topic and tell the truth about this topic in a way that I wasn't at liberty to have the conversation 4 years ago when you and I first started talking with each other.
Disclosure's already happened. We now have the acknowledgement from former and current directors of national intelligence and CIA and presidents. And I mean, everybody says, yeah, it's real.
The 65% believe in alien life. 87% UFOs are not a security risk. If you believe that there's something flying around in the sky that's able to evade all of our commercial satellite imaging, all of our commercial and civilian telescopes, radar, everything else that looks out into the heavens. There's universities that have this stuff. There's obviously NASA, on and on and on and on. How do you believe it's not a security risk?
And that's a great question. We had in this hearing, it wasn't a classified briefing. I believe they talked about 14 different close encounters with our military aircraft. And if there's something in our military air zone that we do not control, that government, we better be concerned. And, and of course, the question is it the Russians? Well, if it's the Russians, Putin's ego, he would land one of the UFOs on the White House lawn and get out bare-chested, ride a unicorn up and punch the president in the mouth and get back on it and fly back. It's Chinese, same thing. If we had it, we would control the airways. It's either one of two things. It's either we have captured something and we're reverse engineering, which some of the pilots that I've talked to, Navy pilots, think that it is skunk works, or it is something from outer space.
Well, when you say skunk works, that's a U.S. government project that's so dark that the Navy pilots and civilian pilots wouldn't know about it, like the SR-71 or the B-2 bomber or something like this. And these would be explained by the military, the very secret part of the military, testing their newest stuff against their own, our own guys without knowing or telling them that was happening, right?
Correct, but I don't think that's a possibility due to the fact that it is defying all laws of physics. Literally, if that was one of our pilots in one of those aircrafts, I mean, they would be basically a catch-up package. They could not stand the G's that these things are doing. You got to see these aren't putting off any heat sensors or anything, and there's no friction. One of these.
I only got 30 seconds. I know you do as well. But you think about like the NASA telescopes that look at this stuff. You think about all the civilian telescopes at universities and the like that look out. Are we to imagine that all of these things have picked up these UFOs and it's a cover up by everybody?
Well, you're looking at a stationary object with those telescopes. They're not equipped to do just that, but the others are, and we're seeing it on our night vision or heat sensory cameras and things on our aircraft. So they're out there. We're just in denial, and it is a complete cover up by the federal government. It's probably, though, what I think is it's so far past our government that there's several major corporations that have control of some sort of apparatus. It is a complete cover up, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Rubio's folks are right, and Congress is not addressing it because everybody is afraid to be castigating the public. I mean, let's be realistic. This is not a foreign entity. If it was, they would control us. It's not China. It's not Russia. It's something else, and we need to address it, and we're not. And it's been a cover up since Roswell. The Russians, the Chinese, every one of them has a Roswell type incident that they'll talk about. We need to get it out in the public. You see these pictures. These are obviously not American aircraft. If you believe your Bible, read first chapter of Ezekiel. Ezekiel saw the wheel. It pretty much describes what you would describe now as a UFO, an aircraft from outer space that comes and lands on the planet Earth. I mean, read it. I know everybody's going to say I'm a tinfoil hat wearing redneck, but the reality is there's something out there, and we're not addressing it.
Where are UFOs from? Who are operating them? What is their intent? Where do they come from?
We've got photographic evidence, that's a fact, cockpit recorded evidence, radar confirmation, visual confirmation, and we have the intelligence communities and military stating that these things are real. Mm-hmm. We just don't know what it is. Now, there's some talk periodically of, it could be China, it could be Russia. Well, I actually went to Russia and I went to China and I spoke with generals in both of those places. And they're like, yeah, it's not us. There's clearly objects of unknown origin that are whizzing around with impunity. They exhibit a technology that is far beyond anything that we have. I mean, listen to David Fravor describe a cat and mouse chase with this thing, a tic-tac with no wings, no tail, no visible means of propulsion, the ability to hover, accelerate from a standstill to out of sight in the blink of an eye, and do right-angle turns at high speeds. And all this without any weight, without any noise, without any visible means of propulsion at all. We simply don't have that, and we haven't had that. And that's the observed technologies dating back, at least the 47, and a lot of people would say a lot further than that. So the phenomenon is real, it's global. We should find out what it is. We should put more resources at it and had more transparency. I'm a firm believer in that.
Are these aliens? Are they among us?
Well, in the old days, we relied on hearsay and eyewitness accounts. Somebody saw something in the sky, but now we have mountains of videotapes taken by United States Navy pilots. We've analyzed them frame by frame. This is a gold mine of data. We now realize that they travel between Mach 3 and Mach 20, up to 20 times the speed of sound. The g-forces they experience when they zigzag is several hundred times the force of gravity on the planet Earth. They can descend 80,000 feet within a matter of just a few seconds, and apparently they can even dive underwater. Now compare that with modern technology today. We can barely hit Mach 20 with what is called a hypersonic drone. We think that the g-forces are so great that there's probably no person inside these craft. A person would be crushed by the g-forces of zigzagging in the air at that rate. So we think they're probably cybernetic, part mechanical, part biologic, who knows for sure. But then the question is, what are they? Well, it turns out that you're pushing the very boundary of what Russia, the United States, and what China can do. All three countries have admitted that they are working on hypersonic weapons. But this is cutting-edge technology. The United States abandoned hypersonic technology 2 years ago because they were unstable. When you zigzag, you could easily spiral out of control. And so the military said, well, let's put that for a later date. Now, of course, all three powers, China, Russia, the United States, are very much interested in hypersonic drones. But you see, these flying saucers, on the other hand, they go back decades, way before hypersonic drones were being thought of by the militaries. So what are they? Well, the short answer is we don't know.
This is a global phenomenon. I get emails from Australia every day with videos. This is something that the public is curious about, rightfully so. It's a vast universe.
Jeremy,
what we're seeing is not our technology.
Have you seen anything, or have you, your website and your discussions with lots of people, have you seen something that has absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, convinced you?
Yeah, it's a cumulative effect of evidence. But certainly, as you see from what I've been able to obtain and release, which is confirmed military footage of UFOs from multi-system platforms, that was something that I put out with my mentor in journalism, George Knapp. Imagine what I can't put out. So there are so many things that have convinced me there's a true mystery here, and there is a physical aspect to it in craft. I don't have the luxury of disbelief.
So, you know, for a long time, people would have thought that this sort of reporting or this sort of investigating was just a bit kooky or a bit of a conspiracy theory. And now these sorts of reports, they sort of vindicate what you're talking about. How does that make you feel?
Right. So the climate has changed in this world when it comes to this topic. I think we've sobered up. We're looking at this now through the eyes of this is actually being picked up with our radar systems by our pilots, by credible people. Sure, there's a sense of vindication for people that have been into this, but much more importantly, we are now facing reality and we're saying who are operating these craft? Where do they come from and what do they want? So I don't know that UFOs necessarily represent extraterrestrial life. It might be stranger than that. We might be dealing with a natural phenomenon that's been here longer than us. There does seem to be craft, though, and those craft need to be occupied or driven by an intelligence, biological or not. So look, this is the big mystery. This is what we need to find out. It would be a great waste of space if there weren't other beings. But the real question is not, are there aliens or this sort of thing? The real question is, who's visiting here?